Alrighty, happy Thursday, everyone. Welcome back into our NoCodeOps live community show. I hope you're doing well, whether you're watching us now live or whether you'll be watching this video in the future. If this is your first time here, we're an international community for people working in operations and leveraging the power of NoCode to scale up their career. So I can see some people in the chat already. Hi, Rachel. Amazing to have you here. And actually, speaking of the chat, let me know where you're joining us from, whether you're working as an operator already, whether you're starting to look into this new up and coming role. I would love to hear about your experience as well. Hi, Jared. Great to have you here. And today you're in for a treat. So if you've been following our past events here at NoCodeOps, you know that we've been giving you and showing you and teaching you practical tutorials, tips on how to use no-code tools. And today you're in for a treat, I think, because we're here to explore the power of thinking like a no-code operator and discover the mental models that will help us ship the automations that our companies and clients need. So today is more of a broader conversation and more to do with the frameworks and the mental models indeed that make a great no-code operator. And to do that, we have invited an amazing guest speaker. He's got over 20 years of experience in the field. He's a trained data scientist, no-code mentor, you name it. I'm going to call in Ray Deck. Hi, Ray. Thank you so much for being here with us today. I'm so honored. I was just telling you earlier on, like you're part of our community and you've been giving us so much value already in the chat, in the Discord. And so having an event with you today is just fantastic. I'm so looking forward to it.
Well, thank you so much for having me today. It's a real privilege.
Would you like to maybe tell us a little bit more about your background? How did you even end up in the no-code space? And maybe you can tell us also a little bit more about what we'll be discussing today in our topic.
Yeah, sure. Would you mind cutting over to the slides for a second? Because that way people can sort of follow along a little bit. We'll be talking about some lessons I've learned in the last while of building a mental model for building technology products and projects that I've sort of developed over the course of the last 20 plus years in my career. And by the way, anyone who wants to take a look at these slides, it's all a Miro board. You can get them from StateChange.ai/NCO. For my own part, I originally went to school thinking I was going to go into political science, and I came out as a data scientist instead, except we didn't really have that word back then. I got to train with people like Ed Tufte and other smart folks who were trying to apply quantitative methods into social problems. And then that led fairly naturally into applying them to business problems. And that led fairly naturally into working more with software technology. And like that intersect of data and software and business problems is sort of where I built my career over the course of the last couple of decades. And I did that initially working a little in finance, a little in consulting, but then I really found my true love when I got to go work for a startup company and start to build things that were at that intersect of using software and using data to solve more interesting business problems and to make, and not only to solve problems for clients, but also to be training up these new potential technologists around me. And that my first love, I think, really wasn't even being a builder, it was being a teacher. And it took me quite a while for me to realize that about myself. And so after having done this a couple of times and realizing this is something I really enjoyed, I was looking for my new act, post-pandemic. And I found myself, going to these various forums and people had questions. And a lot of the questions people had a harder time answering were actually in the no-code questions. Because just because it's no code doesn't mean they're not complicated. And so I started participating more in there, and I get a big kick out of being able to help people out and sort of filling in where nobody else had been replying. Participating in these communities like the Xano community, the WeWeb community, the Make community, getting to know people like, Ben Tossell and people who worked for him over at MakerPad when that was more of a thing. And turned that into a consulting practice that I eventually turned into a paid community called State Change, where we focus just on helping people with their hardest problems and their novel problems through a combination of forum and office hours, right? Because sometimes it's easier to show than to tell. But really what I'm trying to do is like figure out how to help more people solve more problems, because these tools keep on growing. We all keep on growing. As no longer just the domain of people who are computer science majors, but rather all of us who understand the problems in our business. And now we're trying to apply these wonderful tools on the software side to solve more of those problems. So that was a not super short summary of where I've been coming from, and sort of what I'm trying to be doing today, and what I hope to be able to share a little bit today, like the recurring patterns I see, right, that can sometimes hold us up, and that the reversing can unlock our ability to create a lot more value faster in our no code projects.
That's fantastic. And, I can tell from the excitement in the chat that, people are very happy and eager to hear all you have to share with us today. I can see Tyler Selhorn. Hi, Tyler. Great to have you here. He says, "This is how I express myself. I'm a teaching-oriented technologist." And that's so great to hear. We had so many speakers also in the past, and myself as well, coming from kind of educational roles. So even finding in themselves that figure of like really educating people or trying to teach others and helping them. And I feel like that's such a part of a no code operator as well. You're constantly trying to find a solution that helps other people, and so that's a beautiful analogy that it's often recurring in our talks here. Definitely a lot of teachers coming into the no code space. Yeah, and we got Brandy as well, former band director. So yes, that's definitely a recurring topic. Yeah, amazing to see so many people in the chat. And speaking of the chat, we want to make sure that these events, as per usual, as interactive as possible. So throughout the presentation, if you do have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we'll make sure that we tackle them during our Q&A.
Cool. All right. So I was hoping just to, give a quick survey of some of the patterns I see the most often. And then hopefully open up the floor for, I'd love to hear thoughts of other people too, because this comes about because not through like wisdom pouring forward from my head, right? But through listening to others and like the experience of like all sorts of people who have had different experiences working with no code and putting that into their businesses or institutions. And so I'd really appreciate getting to hear from you, either in the chat or email, or also of course in the NoCodeOps discussion forum over on Discord, because that's been a great place to have conversations too. So I find there's sort of four main principles of the mental model that I find are sometimes harder for us to do. And so to the extent they don't feel that intuitive, they're good to keep in front of mind. So there's like what I call the beginner's mind. There's the importance of being curious. There's what I call shifting left, which refers to being on a timeline. Like timelines usually go from like today on the left to the future on the right. And the more we can shift to left means doing things sooner. And trying to have more of a bias for action. And those four things can be hard things. I find myself looking at these four things on a regular basis to ask, hey, which is the one I'm not doing right now, and can be unlocking, right? So that I can be moving again to be able to make progress. Because one of the things about being a no code operator, builder, anything you're talking about with no code is it's all new, right? And we're all growing. And it's not like you went to school for this for 4 years and now this is the application of that, deep training. No, we're all on fast moving water. And it is, and that change in context and also change in ourselves means that we need to apply these sort of more nimble techniques so that we can keep up and be growing along with us. And I think, Tyler, you make a great point about courage, because I think it really requires courage to have a beginner's mind. Because the first thing I will say to anybody who's working on no code project is you're going to build this again. And that's not because what you're going to build is bad. It's not because it's insufficient or any of that. It's because it's a learning process. And that learning process doesn't mean that you are not smart today. You are all smart. Everyone who I've worked with in the no code space who picks this up and has the courage to sort of try to start doing these things, they are all, to a person, smart people. But they're all getting smarter. There's a thing like when I work with devs, like even people who are like, computer science trained in school, a routine phenomenon is people will look up, find some problem in the code or process or whatever. And they'll say, who did this? This is terrible. And then they will go through like the Git history or whatever it might be, and they will find out who made that. You know who it was? It was them 3 months ago. Because them 3 months ago is not nearly as smart as they are today. And that's true for you as well. Yep, just do it again. I think that's exactly right. You do it again, and it's okay to do it again. Because your job isn't to get it perfect the first time. Your job is to learn, to move towards perfection. I said before that I was trained as a data scientist, and I remember Ed Tufte in my freshman statistics class. He was telling us that there is no such thing as right. There is only less wrong. Because in statistics, you always talk about error, and you're trying to minimize the amount of error. And a model that has less error than the other model is a model that wins, but it doesn't go to zero. So if we sort of take the idea that we are imperfect, and our job is to become better, to make ourselves smarter 2 weeks from now than we are today, to ship knowledge as opposed to just shipping product. I'll talk about shipping product in a minute. Then we can move much faster, and we can release ourselves to do those experiments that will allow us to do the greater things coming up. And you used the word courage before. I say the key to courage is self-forgiveness. To forgive yourself for not being perfect today, because you know that the imperfections of today are how we get to the greatness we're able to achieve tomorrow. Yeah, absolutely, about being a moving target. So the way that we put this into action in our brains is through curiosity. And I don't know who of you might have seen Ted Lasso, but there's this wonderful scene where he's playing darts against a bully, and he tells this story at the end when he finally houses the bully at darts. And he talks about a quote which he ascribes to Walt Whitman. Walt Whitman never said it, but it's still a really good quote, which is to be curious, not judgmental. And if we can apply that to ourselves and things that we're working on, we can really make a lot of progress. If we can be curious and look at these processes, I find that and look at the context in which they operate. That means we have to start with the idea that we don't have all the answers. And rather than being frustrated that this isn't working the right way, we can be curious about why is it working this way. And that unlocks us to a set of diagnostic techniques. And people will routinely hire me, and like the first thing I will do is start to unpack, like look at it, like what's coming in and what's going out. Does that make sense? In what way do they not seem to make sense? What does that imply, right, about this brain that we're building, which is the machine? And then machines, unlike humans, deal with being cut up pretty well. And we can look at these individual components and ask how well they're working. And this is a really underutilized feature, I think, in a lot of like particularly the automation tools like Make and Zap and what have you. And people sort of click through the processes we're building out the various steps, maybe in a Zap. But it gives us such delightful information about what it knows at this point, and what it just produced, and what does it know, what it produced, and that by breaking these things down into these steps, we can apply the inputs and outputs to individual components. And that's not even specific to Make or Zap or Flow. It's something that we can also do even in like our front end, more event-oriented systems, where we can be using alerts, console.log. If you're only going to learn one line of JavaScript, learning console.log is so powerful to get an idea of how your app is thinking. And to be looking for the opportunities, like in Xano, there's a tool called Stop and Debug, and there's equivalent, in most of these back-end systems, to ask, how can you pause and tell me what's in your head right now? And if we do that on a more regular basis and curious about what's going on inside the machine, we can shrink down the probability of like where the problem is and be able to unlock it, and that allows us to move much faster. So there's a part where we're looking inside our projects, but then there's a part where we're looking outside. And the people who work for me at my companies, they say the 3 words they hear most often from me are "look it up." So I'll make that part of the mental model too. And looking it up can be about resources. It can be about technical, but it can also be about the business. It can be about talking to colleagues. It can be talking about other people who are in the industry. Because if we start with the premise that we're forgiving ourselves for not being perfect, right, and for not having the answers, then we're taking on the responsibility for acquiring the ideas. And some of this is going to be about like solved problems. People have done this before, they know what the answer is. And sometimes it's going to be about understanding the ideas and the patterns. And it's not just about the technical part. The thing about like working in the world of no code is that you are a domain expert. You're applying some technology, but now you're starting to learn about other potential ways that you could solve the jobs in question. And that might not just be taking that which was previously done by a human and now doing it by a machine. You might be able to unlock different ways of thinking about the problem. And that becomes where looking beyond just like the technical parts, but also like how does the business run? How do parallel businesses run along these lines? We were having a wonderful discussion just the other day in the meetup, right? Where an individual from Pretty Simple was talking about how the value of their horizontal consulting practice, where they work across multiple domains, gives them insight from one industry that they can then apply to another. And expanding your horizons that way can be super, super useful, I find. But the most valuable source of information is just going to be your colleagues. How do they do the work today? Because when you understand that in depth, we're able to get just a lot more done. And then the final thing I would just throw in here is the idea of shopping. When I started State Change about a year ago, the questions were all about how to use no-code tools. 6 months ago, that changed. Because 6 months ago, a significant portion of the questions people bring to office hours or the forum or whatever were about how to use generative AI to be solving a lot of these problems. And I'm sure we're all experiencing that today too. Right? We have these sea changes underneath us that we then need to adapt to. And that's part of the idea of being a no-code operator, is not being on stable ground. Right? It's like all these things keep on getting better. How do we create leverage for that for our companies? And I found that to be just, super exciting. And then in addition, like the big changes, there can be smaller changes, like new tools that came into the market that previously weren't there, or tools that were already in the market and they've been getting better. But the way I would look at a tool is it's going to be at the intersect of what's the quality of the tool, what's the nature of the job you need to solve, and then where are you in your learning journey? Because the other thing that happens, you can have the same job and you can have a tool that hasn't changed at all, but all of a sudden you are more ready for it because your skill has evolved. Claudia, you put a thing out on Twitter, right? You were talking about like, no code being like a gateway to code tools. And like the
Yes.
same code tool that might have existed a couple years ago, right? Is now useful to you in a way that might have been not useful to you 6 months ago because you hadn't climbed that learning curve through the use of the no-code tools. And so giving yourself permission to sort of look outside and re-look at the world every once in a while lets you unlock even more value faster. You don't need to assume that because you had, started from a certain position, you need to move there linearly. You get to reinvestigate it, and that allows you to just make these leapfrogging opportunities, which is one of the things I find just so very exciting about this space.
I love that so much. Everything you're saying, from keeping an open mind to be introspective, not only in what you're using, but your own self and knowledge. And I feel like we're packing years of university lectures into one, I don't know, 20 minutes here. It's been fantastic. I'm just so inspired by listening to everything you're saying right now. So I do hope, all the people here are just feeling the same way that I'm feeling right now, like all that value coming through, because this is fantastic, Ray. I'm so grateful you're here today.
Cool. I'm so glad for that. So the first two things I was talking about was like about mindset, right? And like getting more information into your brain. And then the last couple things I just want to sort of check in on, at least briefly, is this idea of like how to put that into action in the world. And this is where I talk about shifting left. This is a term I learned from people in DevOps, right? Those are the people who are responsible for like how you transfer from code world and put things into production, and like that, where that intersection is, And and one of the things they talk about is shift more of the process left, take more of the considerations that would go into production and put it into where you build. And I find that earlier you think about deployment, and not just think about, earlier you work on deployment, it gets so much easier. Like, especially if you're going to do like, a mobile app, right? Or something that has bigger deployment considerations. And then if you've checked that off early, then you're in a position where you can be testing these things on a more regular basis and be able to see what it looks like when it actually gets into your hand. That can be just enormous. If the question is like, well, then we want to send emails out at the end. Well, let's start seeing what the email would look like. Send it to yourself. You don't need to go send it to everybody. Please don't send it to everybody. But but being able to test those kinds of things really, really early can just give you such a better visualization of what's going on. And like when I was learning data science, I learned from one of the best data visualizers on the planet, a guy named Ed Tufte, and he always said just look at the data. But that idea of pushing it to that point where it can be visualized makes a huge difference. And visualization can come in the form of shipping the actual code or whatever it is that's getting built. It can come in the form of the documentation, which you're going to need to be able to train people, because that also helps tell the story. These artifacts all become ways that it can speak back to you, but also speak back to your colleagues. Because when we're building operational tools, it's not just for ourselves, of course, but and it's not like you need to go hunting for the customers, because they're the people who you work with. That means you can take those artifacts, show them to those people, and then that becomes part of that look it up part, right? That the fact that you're shipping early makes it easier for you to indulge that curiosity and be able to create that feedback loop going better. And the swallow the frog thing, just a quick note on that. That's a favorite saying of my son's, from Mark Twain, where he says, if you're going to swallow a frog, do it first thing in the morning. Do the hard part first. He also
I
says, if
love
you're
that.
going to swallow two frogs,
I noticed that you're referencing to frogs a lot throughout this talk as well. Love that.
And if you're in doubt of what to do, like on a given day, ask, what can you ship today? Can you ship documentation? Can you ship a question? Can you ship something small? This is what Eric Ries writes about in the Lean Startup, but it doesn't just apply to startups. It applies to projects that require creativity. And it's the nature of when we're working on this kind of automation for businesses, that we are in a continuous creative process, and keeping that moving, I find to be tremendously valuable.
I can resonate to that so much. I often think to myself, whenever I have those rare moments when I have some time on my hands, I always say to myself, instead of what can I do today, how can I grow today? It's always a constant way for me, whether it's, as you're saying, like finding something creative to do, or upscaling my skills with no code, or anything else that I'm passionate about. It's always a matter of how can I use this little time I have to grow. And as you were saying at the beginning of this talk, how can I get one step closer to perfection? I love that so much. Nobody here has got any time to waste. We're here for a short time, so let's make sure it's a good one. So I love that so much. We do have a question, if you want to take it up now, if you want. It's a very quick question from Jared. What do you mean by ship?
Yeah, so shipping is a term that we use a lot over at State Change. It's a question of how can we create something that can go into somebody's hand, right? A thing that operates, or an artifact, really, that will create value. And the way we used to think about it was purely in terms of shipping, like the app or the automation or whatever it is. But increasingly, I'm finding that like being able to ship, documentation, or the press release that goes with it, or the announcement email that's going to go with it, can do a lot as well, because all of those help you put definition around what the product is going to be, and also definition around what the needs of your colleagues and of your customers are, because then you have something that people can say, no, that's wrong, or this is right. As long as it sort of stays very hazy, there's an old Dilbert comic strip where the pointy-haired boss says, it was such a good idea in my head. All ideas are good ideas in our head. Once we ship it, it's actually a scary moment. That's why it's counterintuitive. That's why I'm putting it out there. Because now we have to bring it to people. Now we have something that we can show, and people can say yes or no, or provide their feedback or what have you. But that's the only way that we really make progress. So when I'm talking about shipping, is creating artifacts that then other people can look at and provide feedback on, so that we can keep that loop of information going. Does that make sense?
Does to me.
Okay. All right. So
Awesome. I'll keep feeding you the comments in a bit. I'll let you go. There's the chat is going wild. Ray, you're blowing our minds.
Cool. And I appreciate that I've given like a bunch of things to do, right? There's like got to ship earlier, and wait, but I'm supposed to go look it up, but wait, I'm supposed to be doing these things related to having a beginner's mind, and supposed to call my colleagues. Like there's a long list of things that we can do. How can we figure out what we should do next? And I think there are a couple key things about this. The first is probably relatively intuitive of where the sharp bits are. Where and the key thing is, like, if you're putting a wedge into something, the sharp end of the wedge goes first, and the sharp end of the wedge is always the smallest. So it's always true that like the next step can be a small thing, and then that leads into the bigger and the bigger and the bigger. And so like the whole thing about like the frog, he may say, Mark Twain may say, swallow the frog first thing in the morning. I say it's a lot easier if you cut the frog up first, and then you can be dealing with parts of the problem as you go. And if you put a little bit into that, I find that can be high return. There's some other sort of principles along these lines of, depending on what kind of project you're working with. If it's customer facing, has more of a sales context to it. If it's something that has to be used by your colleagues, being able to do user experience testing. But those are all contextual. The bigger thing is, what can you do that is small that you can do now? Because when you're in doubt, that's the thing that I find really unlocks you. So one of the things I talk to my people about is what we call a 1-2, and we talk about this in state change as well. And the idea behind the 1-2 is that you're gonna pick something and you're gonna work on it for an hour. If you're just sort of totally hitting a wall, that's fine. Put it down, move on to something else. But the idea is you're not going to burn a lot of time on it. And at the end of an hour, you ask, well, how's this working? Am I making good progress? And if the answer is anything other than heck yeah, I'm making good progress, you put it down. And then you go and get help. Remember, ask for help was one of the principles from previous. And get their colleague, get the external input that will help give greater clarity to be deciding what your next 1-2 is going to be. And then if it is working well, you give it another hour. And then you bring your head up for air so you can go talk to someone. So that's why I was talking about like shipping early and often. That way, if the end result of 1-2 is some kind of artifact that you can be using to be giving feedback from someone else, that allows you to move back into this with greater and greater confidence. The 1-2, I find, means that you don't need to worry about what the absolute correct thing is to do next. You can do something and use this process to discover what the right thing is to do next. And while none of us have time to waste, this is a great way for us to use small efforts to get to learn. And then as you get greater confidence in what you need to do, well, then you can be doing bigger chunks. But I found that the 1-2 time discipline is the way that I unstick myself. I'm looking at this like, I don't know which of these things to do. It's like I can almost throw a dart at the board. Pick one, do a 1-2, and that is so low cost that first, it's very likely any of those 5 things will have been valuable. So you're going to get some value out of it. And then that gives greater clarity, that gets momentum, and then I'm able to get back into it. By having that bias for action, we're in a position where we can, use this whole thing as a wheel. Right? The beginner's mind, which says we are now hungry for growth. We want to ship the knowledge that will make us greater in the future. And so we're curious. That curiosity is going to get us more information, both about the project works, how the company works, how the market works. And that is then engaging us and filling us with energy that then allows us to engage, right? And ship more things and focus on those things that are going to produce the artifacts that let us learn faster and also generate value for the business sooner. And then, when we are feeling a little bit overwhelmed with like all the potential things that can be done, just having that bias towards doing an action, even a small one, and where we'll permit ourselves to do that action because of the forgiveness that's built into the idea of the beginner's mind, and around the wheel goes again. So some of this is about like how you manage yourself. The beginner's mind, they just do something, is about attitudinal, whereas the way we interact with the world is about our curiosity and the focus on, shifting left and shipping in general. And then how we manage the knowledge that we need to be growing, that's our real asset for ourselves and for our company. That institutional knowledge is going to create the real equity value for our companies, and the action that allows us to deliver for our colleagues and for our customers, so that not only are we making ourselves and our teammates greater, but also we're bringing that into the way that our company operates, which is the word that we use to start to describe all this. But really, it starts with you. I hope that these remarks were a little bit helpful, and I'd love, if we can, to be hearing other people's stories about how they think about these problems, because this is all an ongoing effort and a bigger experiment that we've been working here on State Change.
100%. And of course, I mean, thank you so much, for putting this together, but for your dedication throughout the years, to gather and collect this experience and then turning that into this beautiful learning and opportunity for us today. I feel like, you're enriching our community so much with this presentation, with your presence, with your expertise. So once again, thank you so much, Ray, for being with us and for being part of our community as well. That's a good point. Let's open up the floor to our Q&A. People from LinkedIn, I'm also reading your chat, so feel free to drop your questions in the chat, and people on YouTube. But maybe we can try something fun as well. If you're part of our Discord community and you would like to ask one question now live here in the studio on camera, drop me a DM on Discord and I'll invite you into the studio. Just one question. Don't, take advantage of that. But yes, feel free to drop your questions in the chat in the meantime. And I also have some of those that have already submitted a question for you, Ray. So if you would like me to, I'm going to pull them up.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so we have a question from Benjamin. Hi, Ben. What strategy, processes, tools do you think about as a no-code operator?
Which strategies, processes, and tools? You mean like which part of the no-code ecosystem goes with being a no-code operator?
Probably, yeah.
Okay. I got to. I think they all do. I remember I was working with this guy with a financial institution around tracking equities, and we discovered that the best tool for the job to be helping them keep track of that internally to their institution. At first they thought they wanted to have like a workflow, and they imagined it was going to be Zapier or what have you, and we wound up using Xano instead. And I think the most important thing is getting a better understanding of what your business needs are, and then starting with the business need, and then coming back to what tools are out there that allow you to accomplish those ends. Now, I think for getting started, particularly if you're doing automations, Zapier and Microsoft Flow are great ways to get started. They're much simpler. Especially for Microsoft, if you're in a bigger company where you can be integrating with the existing set of internal resources you have. Zapier, if you're mostly on the outside. If you're looking to build an app, Glide is, I think, Daniel had talked about before. Glide is a great way to get started, particularly with very small stuff. Easy to make something that's interactive and linked back to data that you already have going on that I find helpful. And then you just sort of get more advanced. And being more advanced isn't necessarily linear, right? Like as we go in, there's like this huge network of potential tools that are out there. And not only tools that we classically think about no code, but also like the integrations. Increasingly, like a lot of these tools that like companies use for like, CRMs or process management or what have you, they have hooks, and we can use other tools surrounding it to take advantage of that. So so the strategy I use is to start with the business problem, to talk with one's colleagues, talk with one's customers. The more you understand the domain, the more curious you are about the potential for what technology can do. I find that knowledge plus curiosity is going to be what puts you in the best stead. And because you're being curious about the tools rather than trying to be knowledgeable about them, you are open to more out of the box ideas of what can create extraordinary and differentiating value for your business, as opposed to saying, this is no code and this isn't.
Yeah, and allow me to add to that. I feel like focusing on the problem first as well is like the key to then open up to all that research and curiosity, because you're really being kind of like a scientist, if you like. You're trying to analyze the issue. Okay, how does that work? Why is it not working? What's the flow? And then, because one of the questions I get asked the most, in the community or from the no-code space in general, is like, oh, which tool should I start be using first to get into the no-code space? And my, immediate answer is always like, okay, what problem are you trying to solve? What are you trying to create? Before you even start thinking about shipping the product, whatever the tools, is like, what problem are you trying to solve? Because there's a variety of tools out there that you can use, and it all depends, it all goes down to, you know, the solution that works best for you. And as you're saying, keeping an open mind and a curiosity then would allow you to scale up and gather more knowledge and provide even better solutions for your future clients, companies, whatever it is that you're going to do with it. So yes, 100%. All right, let's see, more questions coming through. Richard, how does one get into the business of helping companies introduce and manage no code and citizen development? Good question, Richard.
So there are a couple ways. There are basically two directions I found are really helpful for this, and those two directions are tools and verticals. So the one of the really easy ways to get into no code, consulting and working with businesses along these lines is to take advantage of the tool vendors that are out there that have this economic incentive. So like if you look at, say, Zapier, Zapier makes its money if it keeps a customer. So what they really want is to find companies that are going to go use their stuff for a long time, and ideally be on Team Plan or whatever, because those are much more expensive than the individual ones. And they have all the and they don't want people to be messing around with it. They want to make sure people implement something that sticks, because that way they don't get a customer for like 3 months while they're doing a project. They get a customer for 7 years, because all of a sudden they become central to how it is they're working. This is true for Zano. This is true for WeWeb. This is true for all these no-code vendors. They essentially make their big money as hosts as opposed to making their money as tools. And this is significant because their incentives are completely aligned with getting their customers in front of consultants. Because if those consultants are helping those customers navigate those waters and be able to ship, they would much rather that some portion of the customer's early dollars are going to people who are doing the consulting, rather than people who, rather than trying to keep a little bit more for themselves, because the way they make their money is really in the long run. So if you were to get up a bit on some of these tools, especially the ones that are a little bit more up and coming, you will find that there are already companies who they're talking to, because they're doing sales efforts to those companies, right? And they are and those companies are saying, well, I don't know, this Sano thing sounds pretty nice, but I don't really know how to use that. And they want to have in their back pocket, here are 5 awesome consultants who you can go talk to, who would be able to help you out. And then you get to be hooked into that. And that allows you to be sort of building out, that gives you a jump start, right? In terms of building out your reputation in that regard. So that's the brand, that's the platform or tool oriented approach. The second approach I found to be really effective is a vertical approach. So most companies that we're talking about, largely are service companies or small, medium-sized businesses. There's some enterprise sale to be done here too, but there are large companies that are involved in making those sales that can be harder to break into, at least at the beginning. So when you're looking at that, small, medium-sized businesses don't think of themselves as small, medium-sized businesses. They think of themselves as law firms, or they think of themselves as accounting firms. They think of themselves as like manufacturers or what have you. And they have their own trade associations and their own identity. If you can be the person who understands their business problems, and you can, even just talking to them in their language, and then you're able to bring these tools that are outside of their domain, that gives you competitive advantage for being able to break in and being able to help them out, even when you haven't built that much reputation yet. And finally, there's a wonderful book by a guy named Jeffrey Moore from 25 years ago. It's called Crossing the Chasm. Claudia, have you ever read Crossing the Chasm?
No, I haven't.
It's a book premised on the idea that your early customers don't look like your later customers, and they have certain qualities. And what you're going to find is that the early customers are looking for you already. They want someone like you. What you need to do is just reflect back to them their own eagerness, and then they come in. Now, that's not what the whole market does, right? A lot more market is more conservative than that. But what he talks about in the chasm is that difference between the early market and the later market. And when you're sort of looking to break in, if you can find where that sharp end is of the market, where you can break in early, and if you're doing that in a vertical that hasn't previously been penetrated, because just because people are doing no code over in manufacturing doesn't mean the lawyers trust that. I don't know, that's just over there, that's not over here. If you can tell them a story that's more specific to them, even if it's informed by your experience across a broader domain, that's going to create a lot of differentiable value. So I find, like, looking at professional associations and being able to network within a vertical domain and being able to partner with the tools as being the two ways to sort of really accelerate the process of being able to reach out and build out that credibility.
The power of storytelling is huge as well, and that's also another hot topic in the community that we often talk about. And sometimes we notice this trend where, or at least this behavior where companies don't really. So, for example, we opened up this talent group on LinkedIn because we're always trying to find new ways to empower and highlight the operators in our community and make sure they scale up in their career. And equally, we get often approached by companies who are trying to hire no-code operators. But chances are also, I've been researching on LinkedIn and noticing that some job adverts, companies don't really know how to call what they need. So
Mhm.
what they're looking for at the end of the day is somebody that comes into their company to fix, problem A with solution B, but I don't know what the solution B is called, and that's why I'm hiring you to tell me what it is. And so, yeah, it's hard sometimes to find that kind of fine line between, okay, do I present myself as an expert using ABC tool, or do I present myself telling the story on how I solved companies A problem with B solution?
Mhm.
Trying to make a complex rain of thoughts here, but yeah, I that's something that I see, I noticed, as a community person, kind of like overseeing the whole no code panorama. But yeah, it's definitely a trend, and storytelling, personal branding, making sure that you showcase what you can solve before sometimes even what you can use, because people, especially in different parts of the world, don't even know about certain names and no-code tools, but they want to have the same solutions that other companies are looking for. And so, yeah, that's a very long stream of consciousness on my side, but it's definitely something that we talk about very often in the community. um, let's pull in another question here from Brian. Ray, how would you recommend that teams document their no-code processes so that the team knows how the system works? Good question on documentation. Another hot topic.
Yeah, and documentation is so hard because so often we treat documentation as a thing that we have to do and not the thing that we want to do. There was a movie in, I guess, almost 20 years ago called The Breakup with Vince Vaughn and Jennifer Aniston. And there's this one line in it. I actually never saw the movie. I got this from the trailer. There's one line in it where Vince Vaughn says, "I think you don't want me to do the dishes. You want me to want to do the dishes." And the trick is, how do we make it that we want to do documentation? Because so often it's seen as a bit of a grind. And I think that's one of those things about like shifting left that I was talking about, like making those artifacts early, that can fall in the category of swallowing the frog. But one of the things that happens when we start swallowing the frog early is we get used to it, right? Become the habit makes it easier. The positive response we get from our colleagues makes it less scary, makes it more positive. And we also discover the methods that are most compatible with the job to be done, with our audience, and also with ourselves, what we enjoy doing the most. People, when they ask me how should I document, I ask, well, what have you tried so far? And this brings us back to the 1-2, right? How can you try writing for an hour? Can you try putting together some screenshots? Could you try making Loom videos? Loom and sort of its ilk of doing screencasts can be a delightful way to create more and better content for describing how things work or being able to document it for your colleagues, especially for these no-code tools that don't necessarily have great built-in self-documentation aspects. Like they have a little text box somewhere, but it's not super helpful. The So what I and then we can, like, again, we can use the no code tools to our advantage, right? You go make the video. All right, well, let's run that through to a transcript service, like by using OpenAI Whisper. Oh, and then we'll use OpenAI again to go get a summarization out of it, right? The you doing that core bit of describing and then allowing more of the tools to do the work around it for you can be a really marvelous experience, and take something that previously was, oh man, this is going to be 3 hours of drudgery and putting things into forms, to being a process of fun and of joy. And I'm not saying it's going to be that for all things, but there is that opportunity to do it. And if we practice it early, and we can discover which of those things either can be the easier way to wash the dishes, or maybe the way we really want to do it.
Rachel says, I'm going to write swallow the frog on a giant post-it and stick it to my laptop. I think I'll look at it anytime I have to do documentation. I think I'll take you up on that, Rachel. We can definitely, you're going to write it. I'm probably going to draw it. I'm going to draw a little frog. That's going to be your next logo, right? Awesome. We have a question from Jared. So I'm just going to post it here. At what point do you make the decision that a project or a task cannot be done or is not feasible?
All the time. I recently saw a fellow who was making a business out of doing idea validation. And he was going to charge, however many, high hundreds of dollars, $800. You would give him your business idea. He would go, do lean startup things, put up a landing page, whatever, validate the idea, tell you whether it's any good or not. I got to tell you, I just don't see the value in that approach, because the question is not, is this idea good or not? Is what does this idea lead me to? Right? That could be an actual better way of doing things. Maybe the project would work, but here's a better one. Maybe the project won't work, but you've learned that there's something else that might turn out to be the way to maximize value, right? For the organization or for the client or what have you. And leaving yourself open to the idea that like the original plan wasn't right. Someone earlier was quoting Mike Tyson, which is a very, who has a very funny way of putting it. Napoleon also said that the first casualty of any battle is the plan, and if we can permit that to be the case and say we're going through a process and we're learning more, that it can work pretty well. Now, sometimes what's changing for us is that this project and this exact specification has a problem. And sometimes it's this overall goal is the wrong goal because it's not something that's solvable. Right? Like trying to automate something that really requires the high-end professional to be doing each time. There are people out there who are trying to make robot lawyers, right? And there's a lot of the practice of law that can be automated very well and create a lot of value that way. But trying to completely replace the lawyer with software, introduces a lot of risk. It's like, wait, I really want to do it. It sounds like a big project, a cool idea. It's an extremely hard thing to do, and for vast majority, not a great use of your time. So like, where's that boundary? But by aiming big, they find some things along the way that can then maybe drive towards creating more value. So I don't look at it as this project or task is thumbs up or thumbs down. It's like, what's the evolution of it? And if the evolution is sufficient, in most evolutions we just sort of call pivots, like in the startup world. And some evolutions are, all right, let's put it down, let's rethink it, and let's re-engineer it and come back with what we think is going to be the best use of our time and resource, based on the learnings that we have done to date. So my answer to like, when you decide that it's not feasible or not going to work, the answer probably is you learn very early that it, as originally spec'd, wasn't feasible. It's only a question of how much change is going to get introduced as you keep on going through it and keeping your eye on the prize of creating differentiating value for your organization.
Yeah, very nice. Very well said. Let's pull in another question. I was laughing because sometimes, in the forum when people sign up, I do ask, drop in your questions for our speaker, and sometimes I get like, I'm looking at the answers and I get like Mexico, Israel, France. I'm like, guys, that's not what I asked. I asked you at the beginning of the stream where you're joining us from. Anyway, let me get a full sentence, a full question here. From Tomek, how to systematically approach the building process regardless of the tool used? So I guess, how do you lay out a building process, regardless of what tool you're going to use?
What I find is this is kind of like what we were talking about before in terms of the figuring out the domain of the business problem.
Mhm.
One of the things that often happens with people who are trained engineers is they start building and they start drawing specs or what have you. And what I find, particularly in the space that we're in right now, we're thinking about bringing, no-code tools to operations, which usually means we're bringing technology to processes that were previously quite manual, is that understanding the process that you're looking to have an effect on is the most important part, and how that process creates value for your institution. And if you're going to be starting with some 1-2s to be able to start to lay down that pipe, that's the way I would do it. I'd go talk to people. I'd go find out how things work today. I'd go find out not from the senior people. I'd go find out from the people on the ground, because that's one of the things about us as operators, right? We understand that this isn't, the way the CEO might describe the way the company works isn't exactly the way the company works. And we go down, we find out who's doing the work. How does it really get done? What are the problems? What are things that really hold us up? What makes it go slower? What could make it go faster? And they will have ideas about how it could be done, but more importantly, they're going to paint a picture of a process and like how value flows through the organization. And that might sound a little sort of management consulting-y, but what I have found is that people who are bringing no-code tools in start to look a lot like management consultants doing the best version of management consulting, because you're understanding how the business works. You're understanding also where the opportunities are to be able to make a difference in that, and then be able to slot in the technology where it can, eliminate manual work, where it can improve the consistency of the company's outputs of whatever these things are that drive value. And the more you're the person who can restate and understand how the process works today, the more a rope you'll be given to be able to decide how to solve that problem. Because when they don't, because it's all a matter of trust, right? The less they trust you, and usually when you're first coming in, they don't trust you at all, and that's appropriate. They don't know you yet. And they're going to be, well, you don't know what you're talking about. I know what I'm talking about. This is what we're going to do. But if you can take even a short period of time to be becoming more versed in how things work, that you could be coming back and saying, of course, you're right, Mr. CEO. And this is how it works. And also, I learned about this thing over here that just happens to totally contradict what you just said. That can be really powerful, because it shows that you understand how things are working, and that you can using that knowledge to be the basis for your recommendations that then form the system that you're looking to bring to bear. So you were asking how to systematically build. I start with systematically learning about the process and surrounding the pain that is to be addressed. And then once we do that, the iterative process, the much more it becomes the looping in, being small solutions to it, and then bigger solutions to it as we gain confidence, both in the technical aspect as well as in our understanding the business domain. So a little more
Perfect.
iterative than a total schematic of it.
Yeah, always keeping that kind of laser focused attention to what is it that you're trying to solve. That's going to make you the hero of the company. That's what we're aiming for. I did see a question that I liked a lot here. I mean, I love all your questions, guys, but this one as well. From Rob. Hi, Rob. Best advice for convincing people they need you when they don't know they need you. So I'm going to post it here in the chat. That's a really good question, applicable to many of us out there. So yeah, how do we convince people that they need you when they don't know they do?
Don't. There's a big universe of people who need you. And I was talking about that crossing chasm thing, the Jeffrey Moore book. And part of his principle is that there are people early on who know they need you, and he calls that the left side of the curve, right? Because it's the first few customers out there of all the potential customers. They know they need you, and then what's happening is a feedback loop of of other people who see that the first people actually got their problem solved, and that their problem is even solvable, and they also see that you're the person who solved that problem. And so that's simultaneously building the credibility of the problem as something that can be solved, and your credibility as someone who can be solving that. I'm not sure I've ever persuaded anybody of anything in my life. I think it's I actually come from a long line of preachers. My great grandfather's name was a guy named Russell Conwell. He founded Temple University in Philadelphia, and he also started a lot of churches. And like in his sermons, he had a saying. His saying was he would rather find the seekers than convert the heretics. And so like he wasn't about trying to persuade people who were going a different way. He wanted to find the people who are ready for the message that you have. Those people exist today. It's really about finding them and being able to reflect back to them their needs as they would express them. Like when I was talking about verticals before, using the language of law and law firms to be describing the same set of problems, because you could be describing the same thing that you might implement in like manufacturing versus accounting versus law, and you use 3 sets of language for each of those. If you can speak to the customer in their language about their problems, the people who, 1, have those problems, there are probably many of those, and the people who, 2, understand they have those problems, there are probably fewer of those, and people who, 3, feel and understand those problems so acutely they're willing to take some risk, willing to take a flyer on let's go try to do something, and there are even fewer of those. But if you can reflect back to them, not the language of the solution, but the language of the problem, I have found that is the way that you really grease the skids of being able to find your potential customers, where those potential customers coming from, like if you're a consultant or a firm or whatever, talking to another business, or just who in your organization is going to become the champion for this initiative.
I'm sure your relatives could be super proud of you now preaching the no codes word out there and doing it amazingly so. Yeah, Rachel says, find people ready for the message and speak it in their language. So good. I totally agree. That's
Well put.
so well said. Well put. Let's see. We did have another question from, I believe, Quarantine. Awesome. What are the key elements that we should not forget?
I think that I would say have a beginner's mind, be curious, ship soon, shift left, and apply the 1-2. The 1-2 is such a tool for being able to unstick yourself, because by saying you're willing to invest an hour on a flyer, it lets you learn, it lets you move, and things that previously took days, I find, can then take hours. Even though the model can be one like you feel like you're talking to people more often, you're talking to people and you got new things to tell them, you've got new things you've learned, and that allows you to be spreading that good word, to again use my old relatives language, they can all see the growth, they can all participate in the growth, and that could be I think the most important thing of all, right? Because that's going to be how not only you evolve, but also the company evolves and is able to deliver more value. So yeah, the beginner's mind. Forgive yourself that you're not perfect today because you're becoming greater tomorrow. Be curious. Be willing to look and ask for help and input, so that you are able to get that growth. Ship early. So that you are, creating artifacts that allow you to be sharing with the rest of the world. And when in doubt, take it small, but keep on moving fast.
That's amazing. That's really great. Don't sleep on it, y'all, says Daniel. 100%. We have one more question. I can see from Mariela Torres. Hi, Mariela. What projects, problems are you solving right now that you are most excited about? That's nice.
So thank you for the transition. I've been working over at State Change, and we're just trying to elevate the exercise. Like when I started with pure office hours. Like people come in, they'd have hard problems. We were working on it, and increasingly, what I'm finding is what we're talking about today. This idea of a mental model that that's about how we don't just solve these individually challenging problems, but that can help more people unstick themselves, without requiring, let's go in and do a consulting thing, but like that people can take these models and apply them and be able to make faster progress themselves. So the problem I'm solving right now that I'm most excited about is trying to evolve this mental model so that folks who we talk to can be can unlock themselves. There's like there's something like 1 million people in the world who have like computer science degrees, and like another 10 times that who grew up and they have the equivalent of like a liberal arts education, and then another group beyond that who it's actually a funny thing. Like the iPhone is now old enough that can drive a car in the United States. It's over 16 years old. Most people who have entered the workspace have had an iPhone for their entire professional life. And and how can we take these people who know that there can be an app for that and say this doesn't need to be something you need to go give to someone else or make somebody else's problem, but say that we're all involved in building this technology and that we're all about extending that and being able to just unlock this. That instead of saying I got to go hire a consultant or hire a development agency or what have you, this is something I can do myself. Or if I'm hiring someone, I'm integrated with it, that I can be owning the result at the end. That's what I find really exciting about the world of no code and trying to help more people who are involved in business get that model so they can be a technologist and be not like just a client, but be a partner in the process of creating the mechanisms both inside their companies and outside their companies that can create a lot of value and help both them, their investors, their employees, and their customers.
Collective growth, that's something that I personally preach about in my career. Thank you so much for this outstanding presentation today. I feel like we're all feeling very empowered and inspired by your talk today, and thank you for taking us one step closer to perfection with your talk. I feel like I used this time, I grew with you, and I definitely gained some value, and I can speak on behalf of the whole community. I'm sure everyone else did who was attending here today. If you do want to connect with Ray, I'm going to drop his LinkedIn here in the chat. I hope you're okay with that. I should have asked, but take this opportunity, connect with Ray. And actually, if you've been here with us today during this event, not only you've learned so much from Ray, from our community, but I also want for this to be a kind of a networking opportunity. Like you've been interacting in the chat, so make sure that you connect with the people here. Make sure you connect with one another. If you're watching on LinkedIn, shoot each other a LinkedIn request. Join our community at NoCodeOps.com. It just takes one person, as you can see today. Like we had Ray teaching us all, and I feel like from tomorrow I'm already going to be a different person. Like I'm going to be a better person from tomorrow and from the moment that I close this event today. So it just takes one person. I love communities because we're here all together and we give each other these tools and these opportunities to grow and empower one another. So yeah, make the most out of it. Do connect with us, with the community, with one another, and keep growing. Get closer to that perfection point, like what we've said today. And Ray, thank you so much once again for being here with us today, for being a part of our community, and yeah, for everything you do, because you're truly inspiring human being. So
Thank you so much, Claudia. It was real fun to be here.
Awesome. And yeah, for anyone else that would like to connect with you, I guess also they can find you in our Discord. We're that lucky.
Yeah, find me at Discord or find me at statechange.ai.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Do take care. Have a fantastic weekend, and I'll see you in our community.
Great. Thank you, Claudia.
Bye. Bye-bye. Take care.